All right, so my name is Dean Chang. Thank you, Renee.
Wow.
Want to quickly say that, for those of you who aren't familiar with Mtech, we run a whole host of entrepreneurship, education, and venture creation programs geared towards helping you identify opportunities, pursue opportunities, start businesses. We have all kinds of resources ranging from courses, workshops like this, to an incubator on campus. It was actually the first incubator in the state of Maryland. Started in 1985, and two of Maryland's billion-dollar companies were actually hatched in the incubator here on campus, Dean and Mtech. Two events coming up that might be of interest to a lot of you are the business plan competition and entrepreneur office hours. So the business plan competition, we have flyers for that in the back. The executive summaries are due in about a month. It's a $75,000 competition, cash prizes to start your business. And entrepreneur office hours is something we do the second Tuesday of every month from 10 to 12 over at the incubator building. And it's an opportunity to talk to me, to other members of Mtech, to some people that come in, some people from Mtech sometimes, some VCs sometimes, some IP lawyers sometimes, to answer your questions about any of those topics. And it can be the most novice question. It could be you've already started your company, incorporated, and now you're trying to raise financing and help on your investor presentation. But take advantage of that. That's free. Plus all the other programs, including things to help you start your company if you're a faculty, student, or researcher here at the University of Maryland. All those brochures are in the back over there, so please pick those up. All right, let's jump in. The market research. So thought it might be fun to just start off by talking about Apple a little bit. Anybody want to take a guess? This
is different than
market research workshop. Okay. Yeah. Anybody want to take a guess? Who thinks Apple conducts market research? Raise your hand.
They don't.
All right. And who thinks they don't? Raise your hand. Well, this is just my guess, but I think you're both right. I think they actually pay a lot of people a lot of money to conduct market research, but then they show it to Steve Jobs and he just ignores it all. Right? And I'm serious about that. I mean, they don't really seem to use market research, yet they're one of the most innovative companies around. Supposedly, all of Apple's products are ultimately defined and approved by Steve Jobs. He comes in, they show him a bunch of different ideas, hate this, rips the guy for that, like this, change this, and then they come back, and that's how they develop products. So if Apple can do it, why shouldn't we do? Can't we follow the same recipe? Well, probably not, for two reasons. One, Apple's not a startup. They generate a few $1 billion in sales every year. They've got big cash reserves. They can afford to even make a few mistakes here and there. Startups can't afford to do that. And secondly, there's only one Steve Jobs. Not saying that, obviously he has a formula that works, but this isn't probably the model you want to follow. I mean, you see every time there are rumors about his health, the stock drops 30% or so on. So their fortunes are so tied to one person, and that's something you want to probably get away from. So if you are a startup, you need market research. Why? I mean, there's some obvious questions. Developing a product is really expensive. Millions of dollars to develop a product, to actually bring it to market. And a significant portion of that is just to even get to a working prototype stage. So why throw away all that money working on a prototype only to discover later that it isn't the product that customers want? So market research is relatively inexpensive by comparison, at least the kinds we're going to talk about today. Other kinds of market research can be very expensive, and I'll mention what those are, but we aren't going to go into those. So if you want to know that there's a market first before you spend all your time and resources and your sleepless nights and all those other kinds of things starting your company. And if you're still not convinced, you better pay attention, because investors won't pay attention unless you've done your market research. You may be convinced, and you may be right that there's a market for your product, even though you haven't done market research, but investors will not write a check and invest in your company until you give them some proof, the best you can, that there is indeed a market for your company. All right? I'll just mention real quick, there's a book called 4 Steps to the Epiphany by Steve Blank, B-L-A-N-K, and it's a great book about customer development. Which is somewhat related to market research, but it's a good read, and the concepts are really about making sure that there is indeed a market for your concept before investing all this money in product development. He's a serial entrepreneur, founded I think 9 different companies, and he's a lecturer at the Stanford Business School. He's a very interesting guy. He was actually on the board of my startup company I was on in Silicon Valley. All right, so 3 questions we're going to focus on today are how do you answer these 3 questions? Who are your competitors and what are your competing products? You want to just really analyze and benchmark yourself against who your potential competition is going to be out there. How are they doing financially? What are their products and how are their products different than what's in the market? And how is it different than what you're going to be offering? What's their strategy? Who do they sell to? What are their resources, investors, those kinds of things. You also want to answer how big is the potential market? You need to be able to answer. If an investor asks you how big is your potential market, you need to be able to say with confidence and with data, it's a $1 million market. Actually, if you say it's a $1 million market, they're out the door. They're not interested in a $1 million market. So they're interested, VCs are interested in $1 billion plus markets. Angel investors might be interested in something in 10 to 100 million. But you better know how big the market is. All right? And lastly, you want to be able to answer, will anyone buy your product? And more specifically, who's going to be your first customer or first set of customers? And why? What is it about those first customers that make your product so appealing to them that they're going to be your first customers? And how many of them are there? All right, so those are the questions we're going to try to attempt to answer with the tools that I'm going to talk about. Let's see. Okay. So I mentioned the market research is actually a pretty big field. I mean, those are the 3 questions we're focusing on, but there's a whole field of study that's related to all kinds of statistical methods. They have cool names like conjoint analysis and multidimensional scaling and discriminant analysis. We're not going to worry about that. If you're Procter & Gamble and you're trying to decide, should we launch a new brand of laundry detergent or should we just tweak our current brand, or if you're an automaker and you want to try to see what kind of car should we come out with to appeal to Generation Y or to people interested in clean tech, these are tools that you would want to use. Okay, that's established companies, established markets. We don't have time to get into that. We're going to focus on what's relevant for startups. So we're going to answer the first 2 questions too. First 2 questions first. How do you figure out who your competitors are, what the competing products are, how big is the market? And we do this with primarily what's called secondary data. So what's secondary data? Secondary data, well, primary data, but ideally you'd love to get primary data. Primary data is answering exactly the question that you asked. How big is that market? And who are my competitors and competing products? But most likely, you can do a little Google search. You're not going to have, on results page 1, exactly what you're looking for. Oh, sure. For your concept, which you think nobody else in the world has thought up before, here are your competitors, here's how big the market is, and so on. So what you often end up having to do is rely on what's called secondary data. So these aren't answers to your exact question, but they're sort of proxies for your questions. And if you get enough data from enough of these proxies together, you can combine them together to start to begin to piece together an answer to your questions. All right. And the other thing about primary data is that even if there were a study or something out there that answered exactly the question that you wanted or that you have, well, actually, first, the reason that there typically isn't a study out there like that is, like I mentioned, if you're a startup company, it's a new concept, so nobody's written a report about that. But even if there were, if you happen to have an idea and it actually is something that somebody has written a report about, those reports are prohibitively expensive. They're minimum tens of thousands of dollars. I'll actually show you a sample of a report from the video game industry. That's tens of thousands of dollars. It's from a couple years back. It's from my old company, so it's old data. So that makes it prohibitively expensive, and so that's why we want to focus on secondary data.